Hi everyone, it's 314 React here, and today we are looking at the third demo on the NVIDIA website, which is the Principles of Shading, which was released April 1st, 2000, and was released for the GeForce 3 series of graphics cards. It covers a wide range of shaders that existed at the time, and also has some cool information on them within the demo itself. So we're going to download it and go through it. Again, this is another one of those demos where the installer is 16-bit, so you will need to download a 32-bit compatible installer that will allow you to install the unpacked files. In order to get instructions on how to do this and links, go check out the description of this video, as well as the last video that I did on Lightning, which contains all the information you need to get old 16-bit installers working. And once it's installed, you can see we have the logo viewer GL here, which is of course indicating that this is OpenGL based. And you've got what we usually see in these demos. You've got the models folder, which contains a number of NMBs, also NMAs as well. There's also a setup file here that we'll look at in a bit, which I believe will load up all of these files into the exe. It has the sounds folder, which has all the WAVs in, pretty standard. The textures folder, which we'll have a look at a bit later because it contains Cubemaps as well as the textures that are used in the application, as well as bump maps as well. And then of course there's user interface, which just has literally DDS files of the user interface. There's no README with it like some of the other earlier demos, so let's check out logo setup. So as you can see here, we've got the standard settings that are present on some of the other ones we looked at, like Chameleon. So I believe that'll be full screen. That's your Y resolution, X resolution, bit depth, Z buffer depth, and anything beyond that, I'm never really sure of what they are. I think that's Z buffer depth, and that might be anti-aliasing, but I'm not even sure about that. Whenever I try and change these numbers here, it causes issues with these demos, so I'm just going to leave that alone and leave these other two alone. The only one I will change is these to be my laptop's resolution. And of course, there's a few other arguments here. It's not really clear what they do because they're not named parameters, but I think this just loads the NMBs and the NMAs. I'll try and find out what these file types are, but I definitely know the NMBs are NVIDIA models that can also contain animations, I believe, from the Zoltar demo, and that logo.setup is called from the shortcut that you fire up the demo with, which should be under your start menu. So from what I've seen from research here, NMBs are NVIDIA model binaries, but there's not a lot of information about them, and NMAs are presumably NVIDIA model animations, but again, there's not that much information about them, so we can pretty much only assume that these are both just related to the models in some way. I've not seen NMAs before, which is interesting because they're not present in the later demos, such as Zoltar. As you can see in the Zoltar directory here, there's just NMBs. So maybe NMBs and NMAs were combined into just one file format for later technologies in NVIDIA. But anyway, that's enough of the intro. Let's dive into the demo itself. So I found that when you launch into the demo, it will come up with this error. I've made sure to set it to my NVIDIA 3060 to render on, but it still throws this error, but you can just hit ignore and it still loads absolutely fine. And the interesting thing is you can go to points here, and what it has is the shader equation as well as explaining vertices. So construction of a 3D object starts by defining points in 3D space. These points are called vertices. Each vertex is defined with an X, Y, and Z coordinate. You can go to lines, and it has a little bit more information here. Wireframe, the underlying structure of the 3D logo is evident in a wireframe view. This exposes each individual triangle drawn. Note the complexity of the model. It's this high triangle count that allows for the smooth, fluid surfaces. So it's a good little explanation of what we're seeing here, which is probably why I should have gone through these demos in order, but I am just doing them in a seemingly random order. But oh well. And when I select solid, it doesn't actually work for some reason. So if we go to shiny, solid, there we go. So it says diffuse color. Shading the model starts with line calculations based on its material properties. Predominant property is the diffuse color of the object. So that's just purely diffuse shading. Nothing special going on there. The other thing to note is just how 2000s this music is. It's very much like PS1 demos of the time and stuff like that. Various graphics demos where they'd have this sort of really funky upbeat music playing, and it is just awesome. We're on the shiny model. Let's go to shader 1. It's a little bit buggy, so let's go shiny and then go to shader 1. Okay, so that's diffuse. Okay, this menu is slightly off. So when I'm clicking here, I think it's clicking up there. So that's why some of these are a bit off. So if we hit shader 1, There we go. And now we have the base texture. So we have the base texture applied. It's a 2D image applied to the surface of the object. This allows for the addition of finer surface details than are possible or practical to model with individual triangles. So yeah, very, very basic sort of roughness texture over the solid there. We go down to shader 2. So now we actually have a cube map here, reflection texture. The reflection in the logo is simply a texture that moves across the surface as the logo spins using a cube map, as the reflection texture allows GeForce 2 to ensure that the position of the texture is correct for all the orientations. So this is showing the equation here. I'm guessing this was all fixed function back in the day, so these were the equations that were just built into the drivers, you could call them, and get these results out pre being able to program your own shaders. Diffuse, texture, plus the reflection. I'm guessing that reflection and these are calculated higher up in the overall code, but it's just showing that little bit of the equation. It gives you a bit more of an intuition into how this stuff works. It'd be nice if there was an option to show the full shader, so you got the full calculation of everything else, like where the reflection variable gets calculated up here based on the cube map. This is the kind of thing back in the day. If you've seen the GeForce 256 Digital Foundry video, cube map tech was pretty brand new and awesome back then, because I don't think there was really any good ways of doing reflections other than that back then. If we go down to shader 3, we actually have the full equation, which is the base and reflection shading of the logo is completed by blending the base texture and the reflection textures. In this very simple case, the color of each pixel is a blend of half the base and half the reflection texture colors. So it all boils down to mathematics in the end, which I've always found really fascinating with graphics. Oh, that looks so nice. It would look pretty much flawless if the cube map was of higher resolution. That's pretty much the only thing that really dates this. But of course, you had way less VRAM to deal with back then, and this just looks like a cube map of someone's house or something. So that's the shiny model. If we go to the Techy model, and we go to shader 1, there we go. We've actually got a same explanation here, but just a different base texture applied alongside the cube map. And of course, not only can we move the camera around, we can move the light around as well. It just shifts that diffuse shading around at the moment. Doesn't affect the cube map at all because that doesn't take lighting into effect. If we go to shader 2, again we get that blend of the cube and the texture maps, which just looks really, really awesome. Again, we can move the light around. You can see the light half reflecting there, the cube map not being affected, but the 0.5 reflection of the texture is being affected by the lighting. It makes for a really interesting look. It looks like it's wrapped in some sort of plastic or glass. So there are slightly different descriptions based on the equations down here. Yeah, it's a different equation. So this is the diffuse part, pretty much the same. Base texture part, pretty much the same. But when we get to shader 3 with the full equation, we get a slightly different description here. Base and reflection, adding a cube map reflection into the shading equation and blending it with the base texture gives it a shiny, wet look to the logo surface. At this point, the shader equation is identical to the shiny logo. Like I was saying, it gives it that wet look or covered in plastic look or sort of glassy look. And a nice little explanation there as well. And again, the shader equation present there. So these ones are slightly different because 1 minus m, I'm guessing that's half the model to apply the texture on. Let's go to the Bumpy model, which is the coolest model. So if we go to shader 1 here, and again, each of these have different music to them, and this one being the most funkiest and least scarily ambient of them all. So we've got the full shader equation here. Bump texture. So bump texture is comprised of a base texture and a normal map. The normal map is a set of vectors perpendicular to the surface of the object. It is used in dot product calculation with the light source. It's this calculation that changes the texture as the light position changes. So pretty much what we already know about bump maps, but a nice little description. I do wonder if it is actually a normal map or just a bump map, because they're very similar. It's just that normal maps have 3 dimensions to them for the different normal faces, X, Y, and Z, whereas a bump map doesn't have that. So it'd be interesting to see. You can see that in the textures that we'll look at a little bit later. This is the one where moving the light source around really makes the most difference. As you can see, it changes the bumpy effect there. And it looks really, really cool. It looks like even at the really harsh angles, the bumps are still being applied. You can see there. So I think this may actually be a proper normal map, because it's able to fully orientate the normals of each of these little parts of the mel. So even at harsh angles, when the base normal is pinging out that way, you can still define those normals within space relative to the object. Let's rotate the model a bit more. Yeah, that looks great. And again, the calculation there. Still not sure what that 1M does. Is that half the model? I'm not sure. Let's go to shader 2. So this has got the bump and the reflection, similar to the shiny and Techy logos. The Cubemap reflections is added to the surface. In this case, the reflection texture contributes to 25% of the final surface color. So you can see the bump mapping being applied there. 0.25 is the reflection map. Yeah, that does look really cool, and again gives it that bump mappy but also wet glassy look. But it's not quite an environment mapped bump map. Okay, if we go to shader 3 there, what we have is a reveal of what that M is. It's a mask. So this is the bump reflection in the mask. The intensity of the reflection across the surface is adjusted by the mask texture, M. In this case, the values in the mask are based on the height of the bumps on the surface. The taller the bump, the more reflective. So that explains what the mask is, which is really effective at making this look like metal, even for a 25-year-old demo. And that looks really good, because it now no longer looks like the environment map is literally just splattered over the texture. It actually looks like it's a part of it. Let's see if we can get the light to move around. Look at that. The only trouble is, again, that the environment map is not really affected by the light. It's certainly a lot more convincing. So if we go back to the shiny model, so there's shader 1, shader 2, yeah, no mask applied there. Even on shader 3, if we go to Techy, go shader 1, you can see here, yeah, it's got the mask applied. It doesn't mention the mask here, but I think the mask is just to apply where the cube mapping is applied. So the mask ensures that the cube mapping is only applied here. Shader 2, there's no mask present, so the cube map is applied over the whole thing. And then shader 3, okay, there's Techy with the mask applied. It's really hard to tell which shader you're on because actual where you're clicking on the menu is so offset from the image. So this is the actual Techy shader 3. So this is shader 1, where it's just the cube map and the texture map. This is shader 2 with the cube map just slapped over the texture. And then shader 3, this is where it explains the first use of the mask. So yeah, again, similar to the Bumpy demo, you've got base, reflection, and mask. The mask is a texture encoded with levels of reflectivity. By blending it with the base and reflection, the traces of the circuit board are much more reflective than the green base. So instead of the mask being the height of the bump map, making it more reflective, now it's the more metallic parts. So that's what the mask does in this one. Look at that, that is incredible. Again, really legitimate for the time. If you go to shader 1, the mask must just have 0 reflectivity on this point, which allows just the cube map here and the texture there. So that explains why the mask is present here, but not present here. So that's really cool. That gives you quite a good overview of masks, bump maps, environment maps, and how they all work together. It's just a shame the demo is a little bit janky and a little bit hard to use, but for the age, it's pretty incredible looking and gives you a good idea of how these things work, which is why I probably should have visited it a bit earlier in the NVIDIA demo journey that we've been on. Now I've had a look at that and listened to all the funky music, let's have a look at the texture files. So looking through all the textures here, you've got the brush textures, you've got the bump maps, so which there's 2 versions. There's the front and the back bump maps. And from research, I believe these are literally just inverted in their normals. So this is on the front of the object and this is on the back of the object. Now, as far as I've seen from research here, the standard blue-green normal maps have the usual tangent space. They encode the surface detail. And then you've got the orangey green bump map for the back, which are inverted and flip normal maps for back faces. So when rendering 2-sided geometry, you don't want the backside to look inside out. The tangent basis changes and the normals from the front map won't make sense when applied directly to the back. Now, flipping the tangents in the shader was too expensive for early hardware, so it looks like they just made 2 versions of the bump map. But at the same time, I can't see where the masks are for the bump map. I just see the bump maps themselves. It might be one of these. That's the top, side, inside. It could be one of these inside ones that act as the reflection mask. Yeah, that's a lot of bump maps there. You got the standard cube maps as well as the IFL files which assemble the cube maps. So they have a list of all these cube maps in order. You've got the metal DDSs, which we'll have a look at in a bit. Another cube map there. And then you've got the Tron textures here, which also feature the masks. So let's have a look at these. We've got the standard bump map here. Again, your red, green, blue normal map. So it's called a bump map, but it is actually a normal map because it features the full 3 dimensions of normal map detail. So that confirms the answer that we were asking earlier. They are indeed full normals, and that's why they looked really, really good, which is pretty impressive for the year 2000. I think it was mainly bump maps being used back then. And then you've got this weird back bump map where the normals are inverted, or the tangents are inverted, which probably explains the orangey color. I'm guessing that's just slapped on the back of the object, so they don't have to flip it for the tangent spaces. And then you've got the smaller details here, and then the back facing bump map for that as well. And then you've got the Tron, which I believe is the masking texture here. So these parts, the brighter they are, the more reflective they are, and that's the mask that's used to accentuate the strength of the environment map. And then you've got these metal textures, which are just kind of blank here. Metal bottom brushed parts which are also kind of blank. Either the detail's really, really light, you just can't see it here, or there's something else going on there, I'm not sure. You've got the bump map on the side here as well, which is again a inverted tangent normal map. So as we know, 2 of the demos use masks, the Tron one and the Bumpy one. You can only really see masks for the Tron one. Bump map one, I'm not quite sure what that uses, or the mask could be dynamically generated from the bump map. In fact, I imagine it is, because the more geometry here probably directly defines, from the description anyway, directly defines the reflectivity. So I imagine the mask is actually taken from the bump map itself. That explains why there's no individual masks for it, because the Tron ones, you actually need to define that extra shininess, although even this one is the main texture, and they still seem to have very little detail on them. They don't have the green texture beneath them. Maybe that was just the diffuse color. Again, there doesn't seem to be any mask. I thought these were the masks, but I think these are the actual textures. Okay, so I was just rereading the description here, which is hand layer texture itself. Base reflection of mask. Adding a mask to the equation further enhances the surface. The mask is a texture encoded with levels of reflectivity. So that implies that there is a separate texture here for the reflectivity, but I don't think there is. They're just all the standard diffuse textures. Or it could be these ones here, metal. But then that doesn't have any visual data in it that you can actually see, so that may be encoded in a way where you can't see the detail. But I think these might be the masks. Metal top. It's kind of hard to figure out what causes the masks. I think the masks are dynamic from the bump map. Just the more bumpy it is, the more reflective it is. But the masks for the Techy texture, I'm not sure. Okay, so I've opened up every single one of these metals, and there doesn't appear to be any visual data in them. At least not that GIMP can see. Could be encoded in a different way, I'm not sure. I think those are the masks that define the reflectivity of certain points on the Tron textures here. It would have been nice to have a little bit more depth, or possibly a readme to go along with this to explain a bit more of how it works. But still, it does give quite a nice insight into how this stuff works, especially if this is your first time looking at graphic stuff in a bit more detail. Yeah, it makes sense because you've got lightning, you've got the bubble demo, which introduced Cubemaps from standard sphere maps as an upgrade, and then yeah, principles of shading. I think the reason why I've viewed these out of order is because some of them have 16-bit installers, and I've only just recently found out how to get past that blockage, whereas bizarrely, I don't think Bubble had a 16-bit installer. It actually had a 32-bit installer, despite being released before Principles of Shading. It does exactly what it says on the tin. Gives you a nice primer on the principles of shading. So yeah, this is a really funky demo. Very, very 2000s feeling. I've also tried changing that additional number after the bit depth and the Z buffer depth to see if it was anti-aliasing, and it's not. There's still jaggies, so I don't know what that third number does in the launch options. There was a 2001 game called Startopia, and it has music very similar to that as well, so it brings me back to that nostalgic era. What I may try and do, because you can see there's trilinear texturing or even bilinear texturing, I may try and apply anisotropic filtering and force anti-aliasing through the drivers and take a look at how good this looks. Alrighty, so here we are in NVIDIA Profile Inspector. I'll add a link in the description. This just allows you to add specific profiles to certain EXEs, games, 3D applications, stuff like that, and apply a number of settings to them. So we are going to go to the Principles of Shading and add the Logo Viewer GL EXE. And then what we're going to do is, under anti-aliasing, we're going to put on MSAA mode, override. We're going to put it up to, don't think it's going to work with 16 times CSAA. Let's just do 8 times multi-sampling. We're going to go to anisotropic filtering, go to user defined, and we're going to put that up to 16. So that should help with the bitmaps at the harsh angles. Hit apply, and here we are on the demo. And as you can see, we have perfect anti-aliasing almost with 8 times multi-sampling, and the harsh angles with the mipmap transitions are gone because we now have anisotropic filtering. Now that looks really good. Let's go to the shiny one. Look at that. That looks really good. Now we've gotten rid of the jaggies and the bilinear texture filtering. The only thing really holding this back from looking pretty much flawless even now is the low resolution environment map. Let's switch over to the Techy one. Texture's looking really good there. And it looks so smooth. Let's go to the Bumpy model. There we go, with the full bump map mask on there. Oh yeah, it says here, in this case, the values of the mask are based on the height of the bumps on the surface. So yeah, the mask is generated off of the bump map itself. Look at that. That looks absolutely flawless. And yeah, it says here the mask is a texture encoded with levels of reflectivity. So yeah, it looks like this is a separate mask somewhere. Probably one of those DDSs that didn't have any visual data in, but the mask on Bumpy is actually generated from the bump map, or more precisely, the normal map. That looks absolutely flawless with the anti-aliasing and anisotropic filtering applied. And I think that is the perfect point to end this video. I love looking at these things, these retro graphics. I love how ahead of their time they were. This is the kind of stuff you probably wouldn't see in games for a good few years. And if we leave it, it just seems to cycle through the different shaders with the music playing in the background. So if you like this video, please do leave a like, leave a comment, let me know what you think. Subscribe and hit the little bell. It really helps the channel. There's a new video every week on video games and technology. Hope everyone's staying safe, and I will see you in the next video.